Hi everybody, Kai Waza with you. Welcome back to my channel, and today a record video, but a requested video I've had a few requests for over the years, and I decided I would go ahead and do that today. But before I do it, I want to mention something to you that I'm doing this holiday season just because I sort of feel like it. That is, I'm sending out vintage Christmas cards because I have a lot of vintage Christmas cards. I love them and I pick them up here and there. So I also have a lot of vintage stamps because I like to mail things with vintage stamps. So yeah, so what I'm doing is offering to anybody that's watching my videos or listening to my radio stations over this holiday season, if you would like to receive a Christmas card mailed to you with vintage stamps, just send your name and mailing address to for a Hawaiian vintage card, send your name and address to hawaiianhifiradio at yahoo.com, or if you'd like just a regular American vintage Christmas card, send your name and address to moodymoodmusic at yahoo.com, and I'm going to have that information below in the description box also. Free, nothing in return. I'm not going to do anything with your address. I just love getting cards in the mail, and I think that, you know, there are other people that would enjoy that, especially this year, and mailed with vintage stamps. So it's sort of like getting a piece of mail that's maybe been lost, you know, in the mail for the past 30 years or something, and it just now has found its way to you. So today I'm going to be talking about records in my collection of the soundtrack of South Pacific, the musical. Now, I would have to, in all transparency, preface this by saying I'm not particularly a fan of the musical, Rodgers and Hammerstein's South Pacific. And I never used to really collect records of it until very recently. Within the past maybe 5 years, I've just started picking them up whenever I see them cheaply. It has to be cheap to add to the collection, because I think after all, they do merit a place in a Hawaiian, Polynesian, exotica record collection. South Pacific should be represented, that musical. If you don't know anything about it, it first started as a Broadway musical in 1949, and it was one of the most historically successful Broadway musicals. It ran for over 1,900 performances, which is a very, very long time. So it was hugely successful. And then a little less than 10 years later, in 1958, it spawned a film, South Pacific, which was also very successful. So, and then, well, anyway, let's start there. So here's the Broadway soundtrack of South Pacific, written by Rodgers and Hammerstein. This starred Mary Martin and Ezio Pinza, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. South Pacific is set in the South Pacific Islands during World War II. And to be honest, the islands and the islanders and everything else is really just kind of a backdrop to this love story between an American girl and a French plantation owner. And then there's some other stories too. There is Bloody Mary, who's a Tonkinese woman. Here is the recording of the film that was released in 1958. And I don't know why, but somehow in my collection I ended up with the British release of this. I mean, it was also released in America, but I have the British release. This one's nice because, well, they did change, the two lead actors changed. This was Nellie Forbush, the blonde, became Mitzi Gaynor. Rossano Brazzi was the French planter, although he did not sing his parts. The singing voice was played by Giorgio Tozzi. Kind of interesting, right? But this one's pretty because it's a gatefold, so there's lots of illustrations from the film in this booklet.
It's got to be drummed in your dear little ear. You've got to be carefully taught.
much of it was filmed here in Hawaii, especially on the island of Kauai. They filmed quite a bit of. In fact, for a long time, well, no, I think now, what was known as Lumahai or Lumahai Beach on Kauai, which is this beach here, has become Balihai Beach. That's what they call it now. That's the beach there. There's Miss Mitzi Gaynor. Now, of course, as with everything in those days, in the 50s, a hit recording or a popular film or whatever, of course, would have its own soundtrack, but it would spew everybody else doing their own cover versions of these hits and soundtracks. So there are many, many versions of South Pacific out there on records that are not the original soundtrack. And I have quite a few of them, but I don't have all of them, but I have quite a few. Now, Nellie Forbush, that character was supposed to be this 20-something-year-old, like, whatever, military gal, nurse that was there from Arkansas. I should say also, it was redone in 2001, the film. It was another film done. I couldn't watch all of it. Did you watch it? I couldn't watch it all. I saw it on a cruise ship I was on, and I saw maybe 2/3 of it, and I just was like, I can't take any more of this. Harry Connick was fine, but they cast Glenn Close as Nellie Forbush, and the Nellie Forbush character is like very bouncy and excitable, and she's supposed to be like this 20-something, never been out of Arkansas kind of thing that's just googly-eyed over everything. And Glenn Close is just, I'm sorry. No, really. I mean, she's way too old to be playing a character like that. And I think it was just ridiculous watching it. She looked ridiculous. She did not look like a 20-something. You know, the French planter that she falls in love with is supposed to be much older than she is. There's also like a big age difference. And of course, there was no age difference in the film. It's like, why would this not be happening? I don't know. I couldn't watch it all. Harry Connick was fine. Glenn Close, no. Sorry, Glenn. I mean, I love Glenn Close, but whoever did the casting of that film, no. So Nellie Forbush was a popular character, and there were a lot of South Pacific records that featured her. This one is from Crown Records, Orchestra of Hans Hagen. I'm not even going to put sound drops in all of these or needle drops of all of these, because once you've heard South Pacific, you kind of heard it. These are just this instrumental, Frank Shaxfield and his orchestra. Once you've heard it, you know. These are just other versions. Instrumental selections by Mark LaSalle on Mercury Records. There is another one on Mercury. I can't remember the artist that I don't have that has a cover that is to die for, and it's extremely expensive whenever you see it. It has a bunch of tikis on it. That's why. Harmony Records, South Pacific. Here she is again. This one, instrumental, I think Dino Martinelli and his orchestra. From the Coronet Studio Orchestra, here's another Nellie Forbush. Very surprised one. What is she looking at? I don't know. Cartoon version. This one is one side South Pacific, the other side Oklahoma, by the New World Theater Orchestra, and these are medleys. It's not even individual selections. It's like an 18-minute long medley. It's kind of weird. Here's one from Al Goodman. This is the first one. Al Goodman would do another version of it later on, which is yet a different recording, but here is sort of she's not in it, but it's Nellie Forbush's little Navy outfit. Well, I guess it wasn't really her outfit, was it? Whose was it that she was wearing anyway? I don't remember.
Hello, everyone. I am Nellie Forbush. I'm gonna wash that man right out of my hair. I'm gonna wash that man right out of my hair. Anyway, if you would like to hear recordings of South Pacific and recordings of actual music from the South Pacific and records inspired by the islands of the South Pacific, just tune in to Hawaiian Hi-Fi Radio on Live 365. And there you'll hear thousands and thousands of songs from vinyl records inspired and recorded by and in the South Pacific Islands, including me, Nellie Forbush from South Pacific. How do you solve a problem like Maria? Wait, wrong musical. Anyway, that's live365.com, Hawaiian Hi-Fi Radio. The link is below in the description.
Okay, now we move into just sort of other random versions of South Pacific with different kind of covers. This one is on an extreme budget label, Palace, South Pacific Highlights. One side is music from the South Pacific, and the other side is songs of Hawaii, and it's budget, like Luke Leilani's sort of recordings. Typical of super budget label. On the back here it says the South Pacific selections are by Don Raleigh and his orchestra, but if you look at the record it says something else. It says by Jacques Davier Orchestra. So take a guess, doesn't matter because it's probably not either one of those people. In reality, it's some weird studio orchestra. Selections from Rodgers and Hammerstein, South Pacific. Fred Waring and his Pennsylvanians. A group noted for their interpretation of Polynesian song. Just kidding. I mean, South Pacific isn't Polynesian song anyway. Oh, some nice clip art on the back. Now, I appreciate this one. South Pacific Blows Warm, Bob Crosby and his Bobcats. I sort of like if you're going to cover something, do something different. So with it. So these are all songs for the South Pacific, but this is like a Dixieland-like band. Dixieland jazz. So kind of nice to hear really different interpretations of those. Likewise, Les Brown and his band of renown, if I don't knock my face off, dance to the music of South Pacific. These are all dance band interpretations. One that's particularly nice, I need to get a better copy of because mine is written on and it's kind of beaten up, but Les Baxter, the king of exotica music, did a somewhat interpretive album of South Pacific. It's not too off the hook. I mean, it's not too far off the mark, but it is slightly exotic arrangements of a few of the songs, very nicely done. But it's not like full on, you know, whatever, exotica. George Fayer, a pianist, South Pacific on one side, Oklahoma on the other. This also is a long medley of like 20 minutes long on each side. Need to get a sip of water. You know, if you don't know, as far as exotica people go, the big hit from South Pacific would be Bali High, which, in case you don't know, a piece of little musical trivia, they needed, Rodgers and Hammerstein needed another song. They wanted a song they felt they needed another song in that act, and they thought, well, why don't we write something about the island Bali High, you know, that Bloody Mary can sing. Why don't we write something about the island? So they literally took like a lunch break of half an hour. They literally sat together and wrote that song in 10 minutes. Now, it's not the most complicated song, so, I mean, I suppose you could write it in 10 minutes. But it's interesting that in 10 minutes, they wrote what ended up to be one of the most famous songs from the film and something that really endeared itself into the Hawaiian and exotica music fields, absolutely. Here's one from the Limelight, is it? The Limelight Singers and the Limelight Show Orchestra, South Pacific and Oklahoma. This one I got for free. He didn't charge me anything at the store because it was kind of eaten up. A little water damage, but he just gave it to me. These are, it doesn't even say who the artists are, but selections from Rodgers and Hammerstein South Pacific. I think it says in here, does it? No, doesn't even say here. So it's just, you know, anonymous people doing it. I love this one because I love Plymouth Records. It's one of the very early budget labels, and they're just kind of endearing to me. This is South Pacific highlights and dinner music on side 2. So, you know, when you're done with singing the highlights of South Pacific, you can turn it over and enjoy some music to have dinner by. And now we're going to wind it up with the covers that I really like. These are the covers that I think are pretty. And let's be honest, because I'm not that interested personally in the music in South Pacific that much. The covers are what would motivate me to spend $1 or $2, and we're just talking $1 or $2. I'm not gonna, that I would spend $1 or $2 on a South Pacific record because I like the cover. And I do oftentimes sort of meditate that way by listening to music and just taking a record cover and kind of holding it as I'm lying down and sort of zoning out into it. It's sort of like a form of meditation for me. So I do like record covers that are attractive to me because I will zone out and look at them. Here's one, instrumental, the Somerset Orchestra, Boris Mearson conducting. This is a pretty cover. Again, these are all covers that I am particularly fond of. Beautiful sunset. I love palm trees. I love this cover and I love this record. I really like this record. Solid South Pacific by Bobby Hammock Quintet. This is a jazz group, and they just did jazz interpretations of the songs in South Pacific, and it's really good. I really like it. Here's the second South Pacific soundtrack recorded by Al Goodman and his orchestra. Love this picture of I can't remember which island this is, but it's somewhere in the Society Islands, Moorea or Bora Bora or somewhere. Love the cover, and I love. This was also reissued, I think, by the same label, Design. It's a budget label with a different cover that I really like that has like kind of A-frame or Melanesian houses or something on it that, again, is very expensive when you see it because of the cover. So, but if I ever see it cheap, I'll get it. This record, I kind of like this cover too. This is Liberace, the pianist Liberace's renditions of South Pacific. I think that cover is kind of pretty. I don't have the Percy Faith one, if you can believe it. That has sort of a nice cover too. When I see it cheap, I'll get it. This one, early budget label, Ultraphonic. I like the cover because it's a Paul Gauguin painting. I have a real fetish with Paul Gauguin, his life story and everything. I really need to do a video about my love of Paul Gauguin. I have several books and movies and stuff about him. This one is interesting. Let me ask you this. Now, the one side is mostly, not entirely, but the one side is National Concert Dance Orchestra, mostly songs from South Pacific. And then side 2 is the orchestral suite, which is just like one piece of music, orchestral suite. I have seen online copies of the same record, but instead of an orchestral suite on side 2, it has a jazz suite from South Pacific. And I'm going to be playing, you'll hear part of this orchestral suite. I'm curious if anybody has this out there with the jazz suite. If it's different, I imagine it's not the same because the orchestral suite is pretty straightforward orchestral MOR. I'm curious, you know, if the other one is really jazzy or what is it? Again, if I see it someplace cheap, I'll pick it up. Great cover here from the Mayfair series. Beautiful. Lou Raymond Orchestra. Great cover. My two favorite now, the last two, and it was hard to decide which one I like most, and I'm sure not 100% which one I like the most, but these are the two I love the most. Rondelette Stereophonic, Rodgers and Hammerstein, South Pacific. Why do I love this cover? Because of this thing, this doll. I just love it. it's so weird and very nostalgic and very odd that you would make a cover out of this doll and then just nothing. I don't know. I like it because it's so weird and I love the doll. Finally, then this one, which I decided is number 1, although that number 2 is there. Well, it could go either way. This one's Audition, which is an early budget label. The Penthouse Studio Orchestra and Chorus, South Pacific. This is beautiful. There is nothing not to love on this cover to me. The font is great. The tiki is great. The woman is beautiful. She's been on some other record covers as well. Beautiful, beautiful woman. I would love to know who she was, whatever. And then the setting is absolutely beautiful. I'm told, I don't know, that maybe this was either taken at the Willows restaurant or somewhere at the International Marketplace back in the day, but I'm not sure. I don't know, but I love this cover. Do you have any versions of South Pacific I didn't show? Because you probably do. There are more out there, and I still am picking them up here and there as I see them. I want to just get them all, just to have them all. You know, that's how it is. Do you like South Pacific, the musical? It's okay. I'm not really a musical person, but South Pacific is... Although I guess the message, about South Pacific is really about racial discrimination is a part of that story and the way people are treated because of race. So I guess it's kind of poignant, these days. Maybe it's time for another revival of South Pacific, but could we please cast somebody of the appropriate age as Nellie Forbush? I mean, really. Just want to remind you, if you would like to get a vintage Christmas card, check out below. I'll have the instructions. And if you want to listen to my Hawaiian music station, that will be linked below. You can hear Hawaiian records from my collection 24 hours, 7 days a week. So check those out. I hope you have a good day, and we'll talk to you in the next video.